I just got out of what was probably the most awkward class of my university career. I just need to talk about something else for a little bit. So here is my October wrap-up, 15 days late. Hi everyone, my name is Maddie and welcome back to my channel, or thanks for joining us if you're new here. This braid is a new thing, but I'm kind of vibing with it. Apologies for this video being so late. I was applying to my master's at the beginning of November, and so I just kind of got swallowed up by that. I do have 2 videos that are recorded, just not edited, so I'm hoping that maybe tonight I'll have some time to get this video out to you and then get those other ones set up and scheduled to go out so that you guys can have some more content, because I feel bad that I've been lacking a little bit. So I apologize. Thank you for being patient with me as I applied grad school and now have to wait 4 months. I'm applying for a master's in creative writing, so I'm really excited and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I get in. But to get back to what this video is about, I read 10 books in October, which it does not feel like because I felt like I was so busy, but a lot of them were for class, so that might be why. Let's dive in. So the very first book that I read this month was Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. I loved this book. It was really funny because I liked the Cerulean Sea, but I don't think I was like as obsessed with it as other people were. So I knew that this book was coming out. An artist that I really like, Vanessa Kelly, was doing the pre-order campaign with this like really awesome poster that you could get from it, and I wasn't really sure whether I wanted to pre-order it, and I was kind of having a bad day. I think it was like September 30th or something was the last day for the pre-order campaign. I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna pre-order it. This is now one of my favorite books of all time. When I tell you I sobbed reading it, and like sobbed to the point that like I had to put the book down for a bit and like just cry it all out, write in my journal, and just get all the emotions out there, that's how rough it was. But like rough in a good way. So this book follows Wallace, who has recently passed away. Wallace is not the nicest guy. He's a lawyer. It opens on him basically firing someone for making a very minuscule mistake, and a reaper picks him up after he dies and brings him just to Sharon's Crossing, which is this tea shop, and that is where he meets Hugo, who is a ferryman, and Hugo's job is to help people kind of come to terms with their death, and then when they're ready, there is this door on like the 3rd floor or something of this kind of wonky house, as you can see on the cover, that you kind of go through, and that's where you cross onto the next realm. So obviously this book deals really heavily with grief and death and dying, so that might be something that, you know, just to be aware of. There is a content warning at the beginning because death by suicide is one of the things that the book deals with, and I've lost a fair amount of people in my life, and one of the things that the book does so well is look at the tangibility of different kinds of grief. So for example, I've lost someone in my life to like a terminal illness, and what that means to have to lose someone after like such a long process. I've lost someone in my life to murder, and there is a person in the book who was murdered, and dealing with that idea of this death being wrong or unfair or violent, or how do you cope and grieve with that kind of loss. They deal with death by suicide, which of course is something I struggle with suicidal thoughts myself, but I also have had multiple friends also go through that process, and while I'm so lucky to have not lost anyone, because it was such a consistent thing in my life, like that grieving process was something that I was constantly going through, and I had almost prepared myself to lose them in a way, so to actually be able to like recognize that in this book and be able to let myself grieve a little bit just really got me. I don't want to say too much more about it because I don't want to spoil it. I did watch a book talk with TJ Klune after reading it, and I got to ask him a question about the book, and he ended up answering it. It was absolutely beautiful because I was asking him about, you know, why it was really important to him to write this character who died by suicide and really explore that. And I think one of my favorite takeaways from that was he was talking about the way that in Christian faith, particularly like in Catholicism, I know like suicide is deemed as a sin, and you know, to have someone go through that and then tell them that the person they loved is going to hell, and he really wanted to reclaim that in a way and kind of give a story of a better afterlife for people who've lost their life to suicide, and that just really gutted me, and is something that he does so well in this book. I will probably do a much larger review of it, because this is one of the books that I do want to do a reading spread for in my bullet journal, so I'm hoping around Christmas to have some time to put a bunch of those together to share with you all. The next book that I read was Flash Fire, which is also by TJ Klune, and this is the second book in the Extraordinaries. When I tell you I got secondhand embarrassment from reading those books, so this book, I'm hoping I have the characters' names right, picks up kind of where the first book left off. So we have Nick and Seth, and pretty much like after the fallout of everyone finding out that Pyrostorm wasn't a villain, he was actually like the hero all along, and Nick and Seth are just starting their new relationship and they're trying to navigate that. But Nick also has some kind of interesting changes that are going on that they're trying to piece together and figure out what all of that means. Some of the mystery in this book isn't really mystery because I had figured it out much earlier. I wasn't very happy with the way that this book ended either, so I'm hoping that some of those things get resolved in the trilogy. I ended up giving it like 4.5 stars because I do think I lean towards TJ Klune's adult writing more than his YA writing, but it was still really adorable. I feel like it also just lost that half star because there were too many awkward sex conversations. Nick's dad is always like sitting them down to be like, alright, y'all know how to make dental dams, and I am just like, I'm very expressive when I read, and I'm like just sitting there going beet red in the living room and being like, no one ask me what I'm reading right now or I will just implode, cease to exist. But yes, the characters are very adorable, especially Nick. I absolutely adore Nick, and the writing of a character with ADHD and that portrayal of a neurodivergent brain is something that is also done really well, so I would definitely recommend taking some time to check out that series if you're really into kind of like YA and the superhero genre and queer literature. After that, I finished The Two Towers, which I was listening to on audiobook, and I started that in September. I must have started it in September and finished it in October. I really enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it a lot more on audiobook. I'm learning that I can listen to audiobooks, but like, and podcasts, but they have to be very specific in the way that they are read, otherwise my brain just turns off and I don't hear anything that is happening. This one was just on Spotify, it was free. I can try and find, I think it might be Sam Gamgee who made it, so I'll try and find it and link it down in the description below if you want to check it out. I think the like biggest strength of Tolkien's writing is like the characters and the world building, and you just get so invested in them and wanting to know what's going on. Sam is personally my favorite, one, because potatoes, and two, just, I think he's such like a wholesome character, and how much he cares about Frodo and wanting to protect him and make sure that he's doing the best for him is really wholesome. I'm hoping to start either reading or listening to the audiobook of the last one soon, because I'm hoping that when I get home over Christmas we have them all on DVD, so I want to watch them all. So that's a reading goal that I have in mind that I'm working towards. After this, I read Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, which is a play, and this was something I was reading for class. Did not like it. It's part of the theater of the absurd, and I don't really like the theater of the absurd because there is no point, and despite that being the point, it just frustrates me. So I gave it 1.25 stars. Basically follows these two characters, Estrigan and Vladimir, who are waiting for Godot to show up. Spoiler alert, he never shows up. And they're just kind of having these weird, absurdist conversations about life. It's an existentialism in literature class that I'm reading it for. Did not like it. Was not a fan. I honestly don't have much more to say about it because of that. After that, I read a new webcomic, which is the Prince of Southland by Chris Giroux, and I absolutely loved it. It follows Donnie and Jensen. Donnie is the Prince of Southland, and he runs into Jensen, who is trying to flee the witch, who is like kind of this gang leader, underworld leader. I don't really know how to frame it. We're also still learning more about them. Through a series of circumstances, they end up running into each other, and Donnie offers to have Jensen stay with him to try and help keep him safe, and of course they end up falling in love. Donnie is not the greatest prince. He really struggles to kind of live up to some of his expectations. It's really wholesome. The art is incredible, and I just really love the characters and the world that they built. I did do a video on it, so I will link that up here if that is something that you want to check out. After that, I read The Witch King, which has been on my TBR for a little while, and it is by H.E. Edgemon, if I am saying that right. The Witch King follows Wyatt, who's a trans man and grew up in this fairy kingdom. He is a witch, and the witches are kind of like the second-class citizens in the fairy kingdom, and pretty much he fled the kingdom when he was younger, and now his fiancée, Emmer, has shown up to kind of bring him back and be like, the throne is in danger, we need to save the kingdom. So there's definitely a lot in there about like racism and transphobia and really using magic as a metaphor for that, which is really interesting. I had parts of this book that I loved and parts of this book that I really wished had more nuance. One of the things was like everything the characters wear has to be described, which sometimes when I'm like, it's a 2-second scene, like I don't need to know what they're wearing right now. And that was a bit of a barrier to getting through it. The other thing that I really struggled with was Wyatt and Emmer's relationship, because they got engaged so young, and there's this idea of, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but basically like you bond with the person, so that's why they got engaged at a really young age. But then of course, as Wyatt was coming to terms with his gender identity and, you know, trying to figure out what it means to be a witch in a world that doesn't appreciate witches, their relationship really turned toxic, and part of him coming back home is like trying to remember what it meant to be Emmer's friend before like everything went sideways. And I think unfortunately a lot of that toxic nature of their relationship doesn't get dissected before they end up reigniting it, and that's something that I found a little bit difficult. It is the first book in a series. I'm not sure if I read the rest, but we'll have to see if some of that stuff ends up getting like resolved later in the series. But it has a ton of really great representation, and I do really like some of the ways that it writes. The author writes about gender, which of course it's an own voice novel, so that makes sense. In particular, there was like an indigenous character, and she was talking about, oh, I wouldn't really use this term to define myself. I can't remember if it was non-binary or what the word was, because that would be like playing by somebody else's rules, like understanding that that is a colonialist language. And I thought that was really interesting, because that's something that I'm always thinking about is, you know, like, is the word to describe my gender in a language that I can no longer, like, I can't speak because it was lost and not passed down to us. So that's really interesting. That's something that I'm working on reclaiming the language, but that's a whole other story for another time. Just something that this book got me thinking about while I was reading it. After that, I read Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. Won't talk a ton about this because I did do a reading vlog, so I will link that up here. And I absolutely loved that book. 5 stars. Don't know why I didn't really like it the first time that I went through. It's about Aristotle and Dante, who are 2 boys living in a border town, if I remember right. Takes place in the 80s and is kind of about like the summer, them becoming friends, trying to figure themselves out and figure out like what the future is going to look like for them. I think that's probably the most generic description that I can give. It is a lovely book. There is a reason it has so many awards. Highly recommend checking it out. Ari in particular, his character just really resonates with me. And then while I was reading the sequel to Ari and Dante, I did read this play, which is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard. Wish it had a more exciting title, or not title, like cover, just instead of just red. I was following along while watching a production of it that had Daniel Radcliffe and blanking on the other actor's name, but it was the National Theatre version of it, which was incredible. I really liked it. I gave it 4.5 stars. I'm a big sucker for like reimaginings of certain things, so I thought that was really cool. In a way, it's, you know, it's a reimagining of Hamlet, and essentially Hamlet from like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. Some people in my class explained it as like being like Lion King 1.5, so kind of like what they were doing when Hamlet was going on. But yes, I think especially watching it too helps me more with plays, and Daniel Radcliffe and the other actor did an incredible job. There's really a lot of like powerful lines in it about like whether we write our own narratives or whether we're trapped in a narrative that is already written for us that I really liked and I really enjoyed about that play. So, as I mentioned, while I was reading that, I was also reading the sequel to Aristotle and Dante, which is Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. I will, again, link that reading vlog up there because I talk about it in there too. Didn't really like this one as much, gave it 3.5 stars. I felt like it was trying to do way too much at once. Pretty much picks up where the first book left off. I never know how to talk about this book without spoiling the first book, because it's really centered on Ari and Dante's relationship, but that's the spoiler for how the first book ends. So I hope I didn't just ruin the first book for anyone, but that's essentially what this book is dealing with. and Ari really coming into himself and trying to deal with his sexuality and what that's going to mean for his life. Not bad by any stretch, but just it's too much trying to go on at once, but of course I talk about that more in that other video if you want to hear more about it. After that, I got the PDF copy of a book that I'm waiting for a Kickstarter campaign that I contributed to. It's called When I Was Me, Moments of Gender Euphoria. Usually I don't like to read the PDFs of Kickstarter campaigns because I like to wait until I have the original book, but I was so excited about this one that I couldn't wait any longer. It is a collection of autobiographical comics from people who are like gender diverse and their experiences in their gender identity, and it focuses on the idea of gender euphoria. So a lot of times for trans individuals, using trans as like an umbrella term, gender dysphoria is the way that their gender is defined because it's like not fitting into the body that you were born into, and there has been this huge push within the trans community to instead frame it as looking at gender euphoria, you know, like how can I present myself and exist more fully as myself to enjoy life and my experiences more. Absolutely gorgeous, definitely teared up at times, really, really incredible. If you can go out and support Quintry Press, they make gorgeous comics, so lovely. Be sure to check them out, especially small publishers too, and the fact that I do believe a portion of the funds is going to help support a group that supports trans kids, so that's always amazing too. So much love for this. I got into it because artist and author of Finding Home, Ari Connor, they work with Quintry Press quite a bit. I think they'll be editing the next set of comics that come out with them, and they have a comic in it as well, so there might be a chance that you might recognize some of the comic artists, but they're not just UK based too, they're from around the globe, so that was really cool to see as well, different perspectives from different countries. And then the last book I read this month, I also didn't like. It's funny, I've had like a lot of ups and downs in October. It was, there we go, The Sense of an Ending, which is by Julian Barnes. It is getting very dark in my room because of course it's 4:30 in the afternoon, but I'm too lazy to get up and turn the light on. This follows Tony as he kind of is forced later in his life to look back at a decision that he made earlier in his life and a friend that he lost, and try and realize that maybe he wasn't the best person he thought of. I think that's part of the reason that I didn't like it, is the protagonist is, and I think this is intentionally done, very dislikable. He doesn't take responsibility for anything that he did, and he thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. There's also just a lot of like cis white man privilege in this book, and honestly a lot of that in the class that I've been reading these texts for, so that might be part of the reason that I was really frustrated with it. It just also doesn't have a nuanced dealing of suicide, because that is what his friend passed away from. There is this whole idea that his friend made this intellectual choice, which obviously suicide is not a choice, so I'm not a big fan of that. And then disability as well within the book is very much portrayed as like a disappointment, I guess, or like, I'm so sorry your kid has this, which is not a good way to portray it at all, so did not like that book. I'm very glad that I am finished with it because I'm not writing my essay on it, but not the best note to end the month off of. Although I did start November with another 5-star read, so I've already read quite a few good books in November that I'm excited to talk to you about in only 2 weeks because this video is so late. If you have any other reading recommendations, if you've read any of these books and want to share your feedback with me, just drop me a comment down below. I love hearing and chatting with all of you. In the meantime, you can follow me on Storygraph if you want to see what I'm reading, what I recommend, what I get up to. You can follow me there, or on my art Instagram, which will also be linked down below. And then make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so that you get notifications. Thanks so much for listening to me rant about the books I love. I love making videos for you all, and I am so sorry that I have been so sporadic lately. I'm really hoping over Christmas time to build up that stock of videos, but that is everything that I have for you for this month. Well, for this video for this month. There will be some more videos coming out. I do have those 2 I need to edit. And until the next one, stay kind.